This is a Brooklyn Brawler, and you're watching another original wrestling documentary.
World Class Championship Wrestling, also known as World Class Wrestling Association, was an American professional wrestling promotion which was located in Dallas and Fort Worth, Texas. Originally owned by the National Wrestling Alliance, it went independent in 1986 in a bid to become a major national promotion, but was unsuccessful in its attempts and eventually went out of business in 1990. Rights to the pre-1989 WCCW tape library belong to WWE. The post-1998 rights are owned by International World Class Championship Wrestling, and select episodes from 1982 to 1988 are available on the WWE Network. World Class Championship Wrestling experienced tremendous success from 1981 to 1985, shattering attendance records and achieving global exposure through their syndicated television program. Bookers Ken Mantell, David Von Erich, Gary Hart, Bruiser Brody, and Kevin Von Erich provided fans with hard-hitting action centered on the popular Von Erich brothers and a cast of devious villains. Storylines during this time followed a consistent theme of friendship and betrayal, with the top villains being first presented as friends to the Von Erich family, only to betray them months or even years later. Talent deals and exchanges helped WCCW bring in future stars such as Chris Adams, the fabulous Freebirds, Jake Roberts, Mick Foley, Shawn Michaels, Gino Hernandez, and Iceman King Parsons, among others. World Class Championship Wrestling was a member of the NWA and was originally known as Big Time Wrestling until 1982, when Atkinson decided that the name of his federation needed to be changed. Mickey Grant, who headed the production of its telecast, suggested the name World Class. WCCW operated its enterprise in Dallas, Texas, and held wrestling events at the Reunion Arena and mostly at the famed Sportatorium, located just south of downtown Dallas, which was also a well-known boxing arena, as well as the one-time home to the famous Big D Jamboree. This is the untold story of World Class Championship Wrestling.
The old WCW.
It was 1882. Old West outlaw Jesse James is shot in the back of the head and killed by Robert Ford in St. Joseph, Missouri. Thomas Edison flips a switch to the first commercial electrical power plant in the United States, lighting 1 square mile of Lower Manhattan, which is considered by many as the day that began the electrical age. The first United States Labor Day parade is held in New York City, and in Dallas, Texas. In April of 1882, a collar and elbow best 2 out of 3 falls match, John O'Brien, champion of the South and West, faced John McMahon, champion of the country, which would mark the first professional wrestling match ever held in the area. Through the late 1800s to the early 1900s, professional wrestling could mostly be viewed at carnivals as a sideshow. In the late 1920s, former boxer Dandy Dick Griffin began promoting both boxing and wrestling cards in the Dallas area. In 1922, Dick Griffin lost a match against Frankie Garcia because he simply refused to fight. In January 1940, Ed McLemore applied for a license to promote boxing in Dallas under the name of the Sportatorium Boxing Club. The previous boxing matchmaker Dick Griffin was apparently letting his license expire, and McLemore wanted to take advantage of the possibilities in the fistic field. He wouldn't stage any programs if Griffin did, in fact, apply and obtain a license. In 1966, Fritz von Erich and Ed McLemore, owner of the Dallas Sportatorium, bought the Dallas-Fort Worth Wrestling Office, breaking away from the Houston Wrestling Office, which was managed by Paul Bosch. In 1969, Fritz von Erich took sole control over the office after McLemore died of a heart attack, and also gained ownership of the Dallas Sportatorium. Initially playing his longtime role of a snarling, goose-stepping Nazi monster heel, and sometimes teaming with brother Waldo, Fritz turned babyface in late 1966 and began feuding with Gary Hart and his stable of wrestlers. The feud between Hart and Fritz, and even his sons, would continue on and off for more than 2 decades. Fritz's other classic rivalries during this early period were with stars such as Johnny Valentine, Stan Stasiak, Professor Tanaka, Lord Alfred Hayes, The Sheik, Bruiser Brody, and the Great Kabuki. Babyface wrestlers playing secondary roles in the promotion at various times included Wahoo McDaniel, Pepper Gomez, Red Bastion, Jose Lothario, and Moondog Mayne. Many of these wrestlers were regular mainstays of the Grand Olympic Auditorium wrestling promotion in Los Angeles, who would compete in Dallas regularly, as did Fritz and several Texas-based wrestlers, doing the same for Gene and Mike LaBelle's promotion in LA. As his sons began to launch wrestling careers of their own in the mid to late 1970s, Fritz gradually cut back in his in-ring appearances and concentrated on promoting, finally retiring from the ring altogether after a 1982 NWA American title win over King Kong Bundy at the Texas Stadium in Irving, Texas. By then, the promotion had switched to the World Class name and was centered on Fritz's sons Kevin, David, Carrie, and later Mike von Erich. Developed and booked by manager and behind-the-scenes booker Gary Hart, World Class' most storied feud was the legendary and long-running battle between the Von Erichs and the Freebirds, which began on December 25, 1982, during an NWA World Title match between Carrie Von Erich and champion Ric Flair at the Reunion Arena in Dallas, Texas. After several of Flair's title defenses against Carrie ended in controversy with the champion retaining the belt by various illegal means, including an earlier match which involved a corrupt referee, Alfred Neely. The promotion had finally booked a rematch between the two in a steel cage to prevent any interference, and announced a write-in poll in which fans could vote for the wrestler they wanted to see serve as special referee for the match. Freebird Michael Hayes, whose popularity in WCCW at this point was second only to the Von Erichs themselves, was selected to officiate, and his tag team partner Terry Gordy was at ringside to guard the cage door. However, when Carrie refused to pin Flair following unwanted interference by Michael Hayes, the Freebirds turned on Von Erich, with Gordy slamming the door on Carrie's head. Backup referee David Manning banished Hayes and Gordy to the dressing room, and the match ended shortly thereafter, with Flair retaining the title yet again as Manning stopped the match due to Carrie's inability to continue. Shortly after, Gary Hart left WCCW due to money issues with Fritz. The Freebirds wanted to follow suit, but Hart persuaded them to stay in WCCW. The Freebird Von Erich rivalry was one of the most violent feuds in modern-day wrestling history and continued off and on for much of the decade. Parsons, Adams, Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, and members of Skandar Akbar's Devastation Inc. stable were also involved in the Freebird Von Erich feud directly or indirectly during the course of the angle. The official last match between the Freebirds and the Von Erichs took place in April 1993 in Dallas.
So you think you've seen it all? Well, think again. The Triple Dome of Terror.
Danger, 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 danger.
3 steel cages stacked 40 feet in the air. Mission, high risk. Triple Dome of Terror. Ultimate goal, make it to the top. Triple Dome of Terror. So you think you've seen it all? Well, think again. Be a part of wrestling history. The Triple Dome of Terror is alive.
Buddy Roberts was involved in several conflicts in 1983 with Iceman King Parsons, including a match in which Roberts lost his hair in a hair versus hair match despite winning the match. Parsons, who lost the match, managed to grab the infamous Freebird hair cream and rub the contents onto Roberts' head. This prompted Roberts to wear a wig and headgear to cover his bald head, but his hair grew back in a time span of 6 months. A secondary feud was born between Jimmy Garvin against England's Chris Adams. Adams faced Garvin for the first time on August 26, 1983 at the Dallas Sportatorium, both wrestling to a time-limit draw. Afterwards, both Garvin and Adams exchanged insults, calling each other a coward, with Adams challenging Garvin to a match on October 7th, as Garvin was about to face David von Erich, which was the last match ever between the two. The angle reached new heights on October 21st when Adams disguised himself as a masked Avenger and faced Garvin. Playing possum, Adams surprised Garvin with some wrestling moves, and then he threw Garvin to the ropes. Chris superkicked him, which stunned the Sportatorium crowd. Afterwards, he was unmasked to reveal himself as Chris Adams, which proved to be a turning point in Adams' tenure in world class, elevating him from mid-card to main event status. Sunshine, who used to be Garvin's valet, joined Adams' side 2 weeks later, and with Sunshine in his corner, Adams defeated Garvin for the American title on November 24th at the Reunion Arena, the first of 5 NWA American/world-class heavyweight title reigns for the British star. Adams and Garvin traded the American title on numerous occasions and engaged in mixed tag team matches involving Sunshine and Precious. It was said to be among the first mixed tag team matches in modern wrestling history and would pave the way for future mixed tag team matches, including one Adams promoted himself 6 years later involving 2 of his ex-wives, Jeannie Clark and Tony Adams, and his protege Steve Austin. On February 10, 1984, at the height of the Von Erichs Freebirds Wars, David Von Erich died from an intestinal rupture caused by a stomach ailment just after arriving in Japan for a tour for All Japan Pro Wrestling. Although Ric Flair asserted in his autobiography that most people in wrestling believe David died of a drug overdose, with Bruiser Brody flushing pills down a hotel toilet before the police arrived, David's autopsy report indicated no drugs in his system and that his death was definitely caused by acute enteritis. His death was front-page news in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, triggering an area-wide outpouring of shock and grief among fans, and was the beginning of the Von Erichs' decline and fall. His death prompted a few changes in upcoming events. David's funeral took place 2 days later, and an estimated 5,000 fans paid tribute to the fallen star, one of the largest funeral gatherings to take place in the Metroplex at the time. A February 18, 1984 telecast of World Class Championship Wrestling was dedicated exclusively to the life of David Von Erich, with wrestlers Michael Hayes, Jimmy Garvin, Harley Race, Chris Adams, and Ric Flair paying tribute to the fallen hero. Bill Mercer and Mickey Grant also provided footage of David's earlier time as a high school basketball standout and had an interview with Fritz, Kevin, and Carrie during the broadcast. The Von Erichs, who took David's death extremely hard, did not compete again until February 27th, when they teamed with Adams to defeat Butch Reed, Jimmy Garvin, Michael Hayes, and Terry Gordy. David had been seen by many in the NWA as potential world championship material. According to Ric Flair, David had indeed been chosen by the NWA to become the World Heavyweight Champion, and Flair also stated in his autobiography to be the man that had David lived, he would have had the potential to be a long-term NWA champion. On May 6, 1984, as a tribute to his late brother, Carrie Von Erich finally defeated Ric Flair after a hard-fought 14-minute battle to win the title at the first annual David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions Supercard held at the Texas Stadium in Irving. However, because Carrie had already had a reputation within the industry for being unreliable due to substance abuse, the NWA only allowed him a brief title reign. He lost the belt back to Flair in Japan on May 24th in another hard-fought match. The match, which did not air on television initially, allowed World Class to use an angle in which Flair cheated in the match and claimed the referee was a sumo official who did not understand the rules of pro wrestling. Flair won in a clean pinfall over Carrie, in fact was officiated by veteran All Japan Pro Wrestling Joe Higuchi, who found David Von Erich's body the previous February and was also the one who alerted David Manning of his death. Afterwards, the Freebirds left World Class in the summer of 1984 and, except for a few appearances, did not return full-time until December 1985. Jimmy Garvin and Precious also departed WCCW during this time to join the AWA. An unusual three-way feud ensued during the summer of 1984 involving Killer Khan, originally brought in by the Freebirds in their quest to destroy the Von Erichs, fighting the Freebirds and Von Erichs after Khan was bought by General Skandar Akbar. During one match at the Sportatorium, Michael Hayes and Kevin Von Erich took turns attacking Khan, shoving each other away in the process. One of the top angles of the summer of 1984 was a mixed feud between Gino Hernandez and Nicola Roberts, also known as Baby Doll, against Mike von Erich and Stella Mae French. The angle reached new heights in the fall of 1984 when Sunshine, arriving on a helicopter at the Cotton Bowl, interfered in a match, allowing French to pin Roberts. This angle, which also involved Chris Adams, ended in 1985. With the Freebirds out of the picture and attempting other angles that proved to be not as highly as successful as the Freebirds Von Erich Wars, World Class decided to turn Chris Adams heel and start a long and legendary war which lasted over a year, and at the same time drawing revenues that exceeded the Freebirds Von Erich angle. The new angle was developed by Ken Mantell, Gary Hart, Chris Adams, and Fritz von Erich, which was born out of a conversation between Adams and Hart, where Adams wanted to change his image and try his luck as a heel wrestler. Gary Hart, who left World Class in early 1983 due to a dispute with Fritz von Erich over the booking of the Freebirds Von Erich feud, returned to World Class in August to scout the babyface talent, including Adams, Iceman King Parsons, Brian Adias, and others. Towards the end of the month, Adams, who had returned from his tenure in Los Angeles during the summer 1984 Olympics, announced his alliance with Hart, which resulted in some friction between Adams and the babyfaces. On September 28, 1984, Adams was pinned with Kevin Von Erich against Jake Roberts and Gino Hernandez, with Gary Hart and Stella Mae French in Adams and Von Erich's corner. As the match wound down, Hernandez had Adams in a high vertical suplex, with French tripping Hernandez, causing Adams to land on Gino. However, he rolled over the top of Chris and pinned him. After the match, an enraged Adams began arguing with French, with Hart and Kevin coming in as peacemakers. Hart later abused Stella Mae, prompting Kevin to shove him in the corner of the heel side of the ring. Out of nowhere, Adams blasted Kevin with a super kick, which prompted Hernandez and Roberts to throw French out of the ring and attack Kevin, while Adams and Hart walked away. The 2-on-1 gang-up continued until Buck Zumoff and David Manning ran in to chase Roberts and Hernandez away. The following Monday in Fort Worth on October 1st, 1984, Adams was selected as a mystery partner in a six-man tag match for Hernandez and Roberts in a match against Carrie and Mike von Erich, with Buck Zumoff subbing for Kevin. As Adams gave Mike a backdrop from the canvas using his legs, Kevin stormed from the ring and attacked Adams, resulting in a brawl between the former friends and tag partners until David Manning, Bronco Lubbock, Rick Hazard, and Gary Hart separated the two. On October 27th, Adams and Von Erich squared off at the Cotton Bowl, with Kevin winning the match, amid controversy when Adams lifted his shoulders at the count of 1, but referee David Manning counted to 3, with Adams lifting his shoulder again, believing that the count was at 2. Afterwards, Kevin made a deal with Chris, leave Gary Hart and go on his own, and all would be forgiven. Adams responded by attacking Kevin. The Adams-Von Erich feud had been set up in this way because Fritz Von Erich felt that too many fans were siding with Adams, and after the Cotton Bowl incident, Adams still heard cheers from some of the fans. A month later, Kevin returned the favor by smashing a chair into Adams' head after losing to him, and that resulted in Chris being helped out of the arena with a minor concussion and nearly losing his left eye when a piece of the wooden chair lodged into his nose after the chair shot, very dangerously close to his eye. The wooden chair angle was quickly scrapped at Kevin and Chris's request due to the legitimate injuries both wrestlers sustained. Adams eventually became World Class' biggest heel, yet at the same time, as a feud with the Von Erichs progressed, he began facing other heels such as Ric Flair and members of Skandor Akbar's army. By 1985, Adams began tagging with Hernandez, forming the second and most successful version of the dynamic duo. Towards the end of the year, Adams and Hernandez used scissors to cut hair off opponents after each of their matches, and this resulted in a Cotton Bowl showdown in October 1985, in which Kevin and Carrie Von Erich defeated Adams and Hernandez in a loser-lose hair match. Adams and Hernandez eventually broke up and began feuding and faced each other in a January 1986 match where loser would have his hair removed with the Freebird hair cream, the same gimmick used in June 1993 in the match between Iceman Parsons and Freebird Buddy Roberts. Adams had won the match, but picked Hernandez up twice to dish out more punishment, and while he was arguing with the referee, Hernandez grabbed the hair cream and threw the contents in Adams' face, thus blinding him. Adams won the match by DQ as a result.
Professional wrestler Gino Hernandez. Police discovered Hernandez's body last night. Channel 8's Chris Connor says preliminary medical reports do not indicate signs of foul play.
Dallas police say it's difficult to determine how Hernandez died because his body was badly decomposed when it was discovered in his North Dallas condo.
He had not been seen since the 30th of January, and a good friend of his from Houston had been unable to contact him and flew down here to check and found him in his apartment deceased.
Police have received several telephone calls from concerned fans who say Hernandez might have been murdered. But officers say they have ruled out foul play as a cause of death.
All we know now is there's no trauma and death appears to be of natural causes, but to determine the exact cause of death, it will take probably 3 to 5 days.
Police say preliminary medical reports show Hernandez had severe liver damage, which may have been caused by acute alcoholism. The flamboyant professional wrestler was cast as a bad guy in the ring, the kind fans love to hate. His real name was Charles Wolf. He was known as the handsome half-breed from Highland Park.
Well, in all respect to Gino Hernandez, I think the Gino Hernandez you saw in the ring was very much like the Gino Hernandez outside the ring. He could be a very brash, arrogant, sometimes insulting individual. He was a young man who lived life to the absolute fullest. He probably never achieved all he wanted to in that. And he was one who typically did everything his way. At the same time, he was generous and warm with his friendship, and those of us who worked with him admired him for that.
Hernandez, the popular wrestling star's badly decomposed body, was discovered late last night at his home in Highland Park. He had apparently been dead for several days. Officials say there were no signs of forced entry or struggle, and Hernandez, whose real name is Charles Wolf, was only 29 years old, Jim, and a very popular wrestler, especially among Central Texas wrestling fans.
That's right. I've got a lot of calls about that tonight, people wondering about it. Thank you.
By the time this angle aired on television a few days later, Hernandez was dead. His death, which was revealed by an autopsy to be the result of a cocaine overdose, ended any prospects of a hot feud between the former partners. Scotland Yard questioned Adams regarding Hernandez's death, but no charges were ever filed against him. The original plan for the Adams-Hernandez feud was for Chris to return to face Hernandez at the Texas Stadium card after Hernandez's tour of Japan and visiting relatives in Japan, and stretch out the feud through much of 1986. A brief yet high-profile angle between Chris Adams and Great Kabuki was played out during the summer of 1985 over which wrestler had the most lethal kick, Chris Adams and his super kick, or Kabuki and his thrust kick. The angle was born in the spring of 1985 when manager Sunshine brought Kabuki into battle Adams and Gino Hernandez. Both wrestlers displayed their martial arts talent in their matches, and during one singles match at the Dallas Sportatorium, half the crowd was chanting for Adams, while the other half was chanting. In 1985, World Class went on a major tour to the Middle East. The tour, which ran from August 3rd to August 7th, was held mostly in Tel Aviv and proved to be extremely successful, but also the start of another episode for the Atkinson family, as it was during the tour that Mike von Erich suffered a separated shoulder in a tag team match with Kevin against Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams, which would lead to his near-fatal bout with toxic shock syndrome following surgery.
This is News 8 at 5 with Phyllis Watson, John Criswell, Troy Duncan with weather, and Dale Hansen on sports.
We're going to be fine. Our families had tough times before. We're going to be all right.
Members of the wrestling Von Erich family tonight face another tragedy.
23-year-old Mike von Erich has been found dead near Louisville Lake. Authorities have not yet ruled on the cause of death, but Channel 8's Nan Goplerud reports it appears Von Erich committed suicide.
It was obviously a painful time for members of the Von Erich family. The search for Mike von Erich ended at 9:20 this morning in a heavily wooded area in Pilot Knoll Park near Louisville Lake. A Grand Prairie police officer's dog found the wrestler's fully clothed body in a sleeping bag.
We was walking along a cattle trail, and he made a real strong indication toward the west, and I just followed his indication. That's when he located the victim.
Dozens of officers resumed the search this morning after finding Von Erich's abandoned car yesterday in the same park. A family attorney had reported the wrestler missing on Monday. 2 days after Von Erich's arrest on drunk driving and drug charges. Inside the car, investigators found an unsigned, handwritten note. It said, "Mom and Dad, I'm in a better place. I'll be watching." Von Erich's mother, Doris Atkinson, was at the park this morning when her 23-year-old son was found. Older brothers Kevin and Carrie arrived a short time later.
It's really tough, and so we're going to be fine. Our family has had tough times before, and we're going to be all right.
Authorities described the scene as peaceful, saying they saw no signs of violence nor any drugs or alcohol near the body.
The only thing that we saw that he was in a overnight sleeping bag, and that's how we found him.
Cunningham estimated the body had been there since Sunday. Family attorney Jerry Lofton talked to the wrestler after his weekend arrest, but called the news of his death a surprise.
There was nothing to give me rise to anything of a suicide or of any nature of anything like that. I mean, he was certainly concerned for his parents, and concerned for his brothers. He was embarrassed.
A Denton County official described Von Erich as depressed when he bonded out of jail last Saturday. No ruling on the cause of death is expected for several days, but authorities say it appears to be a suicide. Nan Goplerud, Channel 8 News, near Louisville Lake.
Mike's death is the most recent tragedy for the Von Erich family. Son David died in 1984 of an intestinal ailment while on a wrestling tour of Japan. Another son had died as a child. Mike wrestled with his older brothers Carrie and Kevin. Father Jack Atkinson had wrestled as Fritz Von Erich. Mike.
In an ill-advised desperation move that would later infamously backfire, Fritz brought in Pacific Northwest champion Ricky Vaughn as cousin Lance Von Erich to fill the gap when Mike was recovering. Fritz billed Lance as the son of Waldo Von Erich, with whom Fritz tagged years earlier, but was not related to Fritz in any way. Vaughn made his WCCW debut at the 1985 Cotton Bowl event. To this day, it was considered to be the worst idea that Fritz came up with. On February 4th, 1986, the NWA president at the time, Jim Crockett Jr., had decided that he would no longer book the NWA World Champion Ric Flair to wrestle in the state of Texas. World Class, still reeling over the death of Gino Hernandez, withdrew its membership from the NWA on February 18, 1986, and became known as World Class Wrestling Association. Yet they retained the World Class Wrestling Championship Wrestling name for its broadcast. The NWA American Heavyweight Championship, which had been the promotion's top championship for nearly 20 years, was immediately renamed and declared to be their world title, and Rick Rude, the holder of the American Heavyweight Championship, was recognized as the promotion's first world champion. While there is no official means of granting a championship world title status in professional wrestling, Pro Wrestling Illustrated didn't recognize the champion status as a world title as it had with the American Wrestling Association, NWA, and World Wrestling Federation championships. It was rumored that the NWA didn't want to give Carrie the title back, and the NWA didn't recognize the faster pace of the sport. The new corporation also gained a deal with ESPN to air a weekly show on the network as well. As a result of the NWA withdrawal, WCWA also introduced a title change rule in which a champion could lose the belt on a disqualification or a countout. That rule had been in place during the 1984 NWA World Heavyweight Championship match between Flair and Carrie Von Erich, and had been used sporadically before World Class succeeded from the NWA. The Freebirds Von Erich War reignited in late 1985, with Hayes, Gordy, and Roberts against Kevin, Carrie, and Lance Von Erich, reborn from a surprise gang-up on Kevin and Carrie during a match in Fort Worth, with announcer Mark Lowrance exclaiming the devil has emerged when returning from the commercial break. John Tatum and Missy Hyatt entered the promotion and started a feud with the Fantastics and Sunshine. Chris Adam returned in April to do 2 house shows, and in May received a huge ovation from the crowd at Texas Stadium in his first televised match since the blinding angle. Chris did begin an angle with Rick Rude, but not before becoming a full-fledged face. However, when WCWA was formed, Fritz Von Erich refused to book his shows outside Dallas. This move led to a dispute with Fritz Von Erich and the company's head booker Ken Mantell, who soon left the WCWA to become the head booker at the newly formed Universal Wrestling Federation. Referee Dave Manning took Mantell's place. After Mantell departed in May 1986, attendance for WCWA shows began to drop greatly. Along with Mantell, the new UWF was able to lure away more WCWA talent as well. During a May 26, 1986 six-man tag team match at Will Rogers Coliseum in Fort Worth, Adams was paired with Lance and Kevin von Erich against Rick Rude, Kabuki, and the One Man Gang. It was the first time since September 30, 1984 that Adams was partnered with a Von Erich in any tag team match, and there was still some tension between Kevin and Chris in the early going. But that eventually changed as the match progressed. As the match wound down, the One Man Gang was about to launch a major assault on Kevin with a chain, as Kevin was recovering from a double clothesline by One Man Gang and Rick Rude. As referee Rick Hazard was trying to separate Rude and Lance, Adams entered the ring and super kicked One Man Gang, then rolled Kevin on top of him and alerted Hazard of the winning pinfall. After the match with Chris, Lance, and Kevin standing in the center of the ring, Kevin extended his hand and Chris shook it and the two embraced in the center of the ring, signaling the end of the World Class Championship Wrestling's most storied feud. Adams also feuded with Tatum and Hyatt, with Sunshine once again managing Chris, and also began wrestling against Matt Bourne and Buzz Sawyer. Chris eventually continued wrestling against Rude on several occasions, and in one match after a Rude Awakening neckbreaker, Chris regained his eyesight. With the patch gone, Chris became the #1 contender to Rude's world-class heavyweight title, and on July 4th, 1986, he won it after a hard-fought and bloody battle at the Reunion Arena in Dallas. Adams won with a small package when interference from Rude's manager Percy Pringle backfired. Over the course of the next 3 months, Chris defended the title almost every week against challengers like Rude, Kabuki, One Man Gang, Blackjack Mulligan, and others. In a non-title match at the Sportatorium, he lost to the Ultimate Warrior, who was then known as the Dingo Warrior. In a match, Adams used a piledriver on the Warrior, and somehow the force of the piledriver hit Adams' throat, which had been hit earlier due to interference by manager Percy Pringle during the pre-match altercation. Unable to continue, Adams allowed the Warrior to pin him following a flying elbow. Chris gave the Warrior a title shot and narrowly defeated him. Adams also faced Abdullah the Butcher in some matches, all of which either ended in a countout or a DQ against Abdullah. Mulligan and Bruiser Brody were involved in a three-way feud during that time, while South African Steve Simpson joined World Class as an ally of Adams and the Von Erichs. Between July and September of 1986, many of the top stars of World Class, including Adams, Parsons, Hyatt, John Tatum, and the Freebirds, defected to the Universal Wrestling Federation, following longtime WCCW booker Ken Mantell, who had resigned and joined the UWF after a falling out with Fritz. World Class Heavyweight Champion Chris Adams was forced to relinquish his championship on September 17, 1986, one day after being convicted of a misdemeanor assault from an incident on June 30, 1986, in flight between San Juan, Puerto Rico and Dallas. According to testimony and accounts from the Dallas Morning News, Adams, who was under the influence, verbally assaulted a stewardess when he became belligerent when it was announced that liquor sales would no longer be available in his flight. He then headbutted an American Airlines co-pilot before Kevin von Erich restrained Adams. He left World Class shortly thereafter and joined Ken Mantell in the UWF. When it was told that Adams would lose the belt to Black Bart on September 19th at the Dallas Sportatorium on a decision that enraged Adams, then Booker Gary Hart, and several other wrestlers. Adams was sentenced on October 25th to 90 days in jail and fined $500. He began his sentence on November the 1st and was released on January 29, 1987. Kevin von Erich later defeated Black Bart for the World Class Heavyweight title at the Cotton Bowl and held the belt for nearly a year. The life of Carrie von Erich changed forever on June 4, 1986, when the motorcycle he was riding hit a parked police car. Carrie, who was riding barefoot, had apparently gotten his right foot caught in the rack of the lights on top of the squad car, nearly ripping off his entire foot. Doctors at the hospital performed hours of delicate surgery in order to try and save the foot, ultimately having to fuse the ankle in order for Carrie to be able to use it properly. At the time of the accident, Carrie was World Class' most popular superstar, and his lengthy absence due to the injury was a factor in attendance dropping throughout the area. Although fans were told Carrie would not be out of action for long, They started to think differently after seeing him struggling on crutches for nearly 18 months. Trying to rush back into the squared circle was the greatest mistake, as he attempted his initial comeback against Brian Adias in February 1987. Although Carrie and Adias wrestled a very cautious match, Carrie re-injured the foot to the extent where the doctors had to amputate it. In what was at the time one of the sport's greatest secrets, Carrie returned to professional wrestling full-time with the help of a prosthetic foot, which Carrie was able to conceal with a larger wrestling boot. It wasn't until 1988 during a match against Colonel De Beers in Las Vegas in which De Beers accidentally pulled Carrie's right boot off. Remarkably, Carrie von Erich was seemingly better than ever in the eyes of wrestling fans. He was still able to throw an effective dropkick, run around the ring, and perform seemingly death-defying moves. However, this came with a big price. Another secret Carrie had to keep from the fans. Due to the constant pain he was in, Carrie became addicted to painkillers and later hard drugs. This addiction would cause Carrie's life to spiral out of control. Though he did hold the Intercontinental title during his only venture into the WWF, Carrie fell deeper into depression and addiction, which would ultimately cause grave consequences. As a result of this accident, the organization's attendance dropped greatly. WCCW's fortunes declined further in 1986 and 87, with the Texas oil business entering a recession, as well as Mike von Erich's suicide. As a result of these multiple catastrophes, attendance in both Dallas and Fort Worth plummeted. According to some former WCCW wrestlers, many fans became disillusioned with the Von Erichs as the supposedly clean-living brothers. Drug use became harder to cover up.
For pizza out, it's pizza in. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they frequently no-showed cards of promotion booked in smaller towns. Sportatorium cards, which at the beginning of the year drew well over 4,000, had dropped to less than 1,000 within a time span of 6 months. The upcoming Parade of Champions card held in May was renamed in honor to both David and Mike von Erich. This event, which drew over 20,000 fans in the previous 3 years, drew less than 6,000 for the 1987 event, which featured Kevin von Erich defending the world-class title against Nord the Barbarian, who in actuality was a protege of Bruiser Brody's. To make matters worse, the WWF had also reached the pinnacle of its success at WrestleMania 3 and began to gain more national exposure. By now, attendance for WCCW shows was nearly dead. In mid-1987, after the buyout of the UWF by Jim Crockett Promotions, Ken Mantell launched his own Wild West wrestling promotion from the popular Fort Worth night spot Billy Bob's, Texas as its home base. Headlining for Mantell's group were such former class stars such as Wild Bill Irwin, The Missing Link, Buddy Roberts, Brian Adias, Jack Victory, as well as Lance Von Erich, who was now known as Fabulous Lance, who had then walked out on Fritz in a dispute over money. Bill Mercer left World Class to become the ring announcer for Wild West Wrestling. A major pay-per-view card, AWA Superclass 3, was held in Chicago in December 1998, featuring a world title unification match in which Jerry Lawler defeated Carrie von Erich. However, Superclass 3 was not a hit, and Pro Wrestling USA was dissolved. After Superclass 3, Ken Mantell and Fritz von Erich sold WCCW to CWA owner Jerry Jarrett. According to Skandar Akbar, Jarrett got sued by Kevin, although his brother Carrie welcomed Jarrett to the promotion. The combined federation became known as the USWA. Jarrett would run the new USWA out of 2 headquarters, one in Dallas and the other one in Memphis. The deal made Jarrett 60% owner of World Class, with Kevin and Carrie von Erich being 40% owners. Following the merger of World Class with the CWA and AWA, the promotion originally developed an angle pitting wrestlers from Texas against wrestlers from Tennessee. This would eventually evolve into a new angle that would bring a return to sellout crowds to the Sportatorium for the first time in over 6 months. Several attempts to revive WCCW since then have been modest at best. In 1991, Kevin von Erich began a working agreement with Boston-based International Championship Wrestling, which renamed itself International World Class Championship Wrestling. During that brief time in IWCCW, Kevin had a legendary interview in which Tony Rumble, aka the Boston Bad Boy, made derogatory remarks about Kevin and his brothers, after which Kevin ran Rumble out of the interview studio. The following year, Kevin began promoting a few scattered cards under the WCCW banner, and finally in 1997, Gary Hart, with no participation by either Kevin nor Fritz, launched a world-class and name-only independent promotion at the Sportatorium. This organization, known as World Class 2, The Next Generation, featured only a few of the surviving wrestlers from the original WCCW group, most notably Chris Adams, Iceman Parsons, and Maniac Mike Davis, as well as Gary's son, Chad Hart. It folded in less than a year. In 2009, the entire Von Erich family was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. World-class two major venues, Reunion Arena and Texas Stadium, were demolished soon thereafter. Reunion Arena was imploded on November 17, 2009, while Texas Stadium saw the same fate nearly 5 months later on April 1, 2010. In May 2018, Imperial Wrestling Revolution, an Oklahoma-based independent wrestling promotion, announced they had changed their name to World Class Revolution in honor of World Class Championship Wrestling, with the blessing of Kevin Von Erich and the Von Erich family. WCCW television production was way ahead of its time thanks to its syndicated program's original producer Mickey Grant. Under Grant, World Class was the first wrestling promotion to use multiple handheld cameras and to give matches an up-close, more urgent feel. The show was also among the first to air pre-taped vignettes of wrestlers outside the squared circle. WCCW episodes are available for viewing on the WWE Network. That was the untold story of World Class Championship Wrestling.